that we're participating in this process. We're following all the rules and directives of the judge. And what we're not going to do, and what we'll never do, is to intervene politically. We'll never interfere to diminish the independence of our judiciary and to diminish the system.
Manner to disturb the independence of the public prosecution process. And what I will return to is the exact statement made by Madame Kathleen Roussel, the very head of the Public Prosecution Service, who has said, "We have not sought or received instructions in respect of the prosecution of Mr. Norman from the PCO or any other government department or body." That is a good thing, Madam Speaker, and that is exactly what we want to remain the case in this case. Merci.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for North Island Powell River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I'm here to speak to the Conservative motion. The issue before us is a serious one, and the last several weeks in Parliament have been ones of great conflict and serious debate about the ethical behaviour Canadians want to see in the people who represent them. In the midst of this drama and concern, the lives of the people of this country continue, and the struggles they face at times make it very hard to have time for the space to consider these serious issues, brought here before the Justice Committee, the House, and before all Canadians. In reflection of these realities, I would like to take a personal moment, Madam Speaker, to recognize the fact that life happens outside of politics. I was sadly reminded of this on February the 11th of this year when my brother Darius William Moll died suddenly and unexpectedly of a massive heart attack. In those few weeks after his passing, the busy life that I live, filled with working in my riding and making sure that that voice is heard loud and clear here in this place, was paused. Yesterday, my brother would have been 39. It was a sad day for my family, and I want to recognize them, as I believe we should all recognize the people who love us, as we ask them repeatedly to let us come to this place and do the important work that we do here, rather than being with them through these difficult times. My brother was a hardworking man. He has left a huge hole in the world with his passing, and it is very hard to adjust. My brother was a powerful singer, a man who turned friends into family, and the middle brother of 5 siblings. I am very grateful to my many constituents who sent cards and messages of condolences during that time. It is moments like this that we remember we are people. We do not know how much time we or our loved ones have in this world, and the people that we love are so very precious. As we are here doing the work that we must, I hope we all remember to appreciate those people who mean so very much to us. I have been sadly reminded of this with the loss of a very beloved brother. But today, we are here to speak on the case of Vice Admiral Mark Norman. I am personally deeply concerned about the allegations that have been put forward about the Prime Minister and the Privy Council Office of influencing federal prosecutors in the case of Vice Admiral Mark Norman. While these allegations are unproven, it is troubling given the other case of alleged interference from the Prime Minister's office in the case of SNC Lavalin. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I believe that all of us here have been told that one politician is much like another. The level of cynicism in the world and in Canada concerns me greatly. I believe that the people of this country want us to focus on the issues that matter most to them. The Government of Canada has the important duty of spending tax dollars in a responsible way, looking at opportunities that will benefit the people of this country, closing the gaps that leave too many far, far behind, and having the institutions of Canada operate without any political interference. When I speak with my constituents, they want to feel like their political representatives have their back. I find that even disagreement is okay if I take the time to learn and to understand. In my riding of North Island Powell River, many are worried about the environment. Today in Campbell River, local high schools are planning to strike in protest of the lack of action on climate change. It is very important to listen to young people. I remember the late Elder Ellen White telling me that young people had the energy and were quicker to see injustice. This made their voices extremely valuable, and I think we've seen that in this House most recently. I certainly hope that all of us here remember to listen to them. I also hear from veterans who feel betrayed after many years of that experience with the former government. It is very exasperating for them to have to continue to fight for the very basic of supports. And affordability continues to be a very significant issue. In my riding, people are not sure how they will afford the most basic of necessities, like the cost of housing and medication, as they continue to increase. Waiting for these issues to be addressed creates cynicism, and when the reality that the former Minister of Justice has brought to our attention is replayed in the media, reasonably, Canadians are concerned. Now we look at this motion before us today, and we have heard that the lawyers of Vice Admiral Mark Norman say that the Crown prosecutors have been politically influenced by lawyers from the Privy Council's office. With the questions around that have arose from the actions of the former Privy Council clerk and the Prime Minister, this is something that Canadians deserve to know more about. This is exactly why New Democrats continue to insist on a public inquiry. In an article in the Huffington Post regarding Vice Admiral Norman on February the 11th, 2019, it said, and I quote, Vice Admiral Mark Norman's legal team has raised questions about the independence of federal prosecutors after the Crown and lawyers from the department that supports Prime Minister spoke several times last year about trial strategy. For the people across Canada who are working several jobs to make enough to pay for a loved one's medication, or a person who is at risk of homelessness, this sounds like something so far from their everyday life. And they have asked me, why should I worry about this? Well, Madam Speaker, it is important because it speaks to the strength of our systems. It speaks to the ability of the Prime Minister's office to politically interfere in the systems that we have to put our faith in. Vice Admiral Norman's lawyers have made it clear that the Privy Council office supports the Prime Minister and executes what the Prime Minister's office wants. Therefore, Crown attorneys should not have discussed trial strategy with them, as it is seen as influence on Crown attorneys that should be independent of politics. Even the consideration that Crown attorneys are being put in the position of any political interference is something we should all be disturbed by. I will state here again that allegations have not been proven in court. I respect that, and the fact that the allegations include the Prime Minister's office inappropriately bypassing the Office of the Attorney General and dealing directly with the Public Prosecution Service of Canada are ones that in the current political climate only worry me more. Today we have a motion before us, and the member of Milton has asked that given the recent allegations of political interference against the Prime Minister, and given that Canadians reject the Prime Minister's excuse for his actions as simply routine government business, the House call on the government to show respect for the rule of law, and immediately. These are requests that must be considered carefully, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that the members on the government side are considering heavily what has happened in this case and in the case we have most recently heard so much about. Madam Speaker, I have the deep honor of representing the people of the former Attorney General, the Weewakai, the Weewakam communities of the Lake-Wata speaking people. The member of Vancouver Granville has often introduced me as her mother's Member of Parliament, something that I continue to be very honored to be. It was in a community that I represent that the former Minister of Justice came for a traditional ceremony in the Big House, a ceremony of honoring, and as one elder said to me, we are wrapping her up in our love. In this place, there is not, sadly, a deep understanding of the words that the former minister spoke to the Justice Committee. She said, and I quote, "I was taught to always be careful what you say because you cannot take it back. I was taught to always hold true to your core values and principles and to act with integrity. These are the teachings of my parents, my grandparents, and my community. I come from a long line of matriarchs, and I am a truth teller in accordance with the laws and traditions of our big house. This is who I am, and this is who I always will be." End quote. I believe, Speaker, that these words will be written in history books. When I heard them spoken, I was moved because I could feel what she was telling people, something that so few were able to understand. For me, this was a statement of fact, of identity. Identity in the sense of she knows where she comes from, the matriarchs who have worked hard for several generations to put her in the place that she is today. That is dedication and a responsibility that one does not take lightly because those generations are watching and they gave up so very much. I believe the member has fulfilled this responsibly, and I am very proud to know her and her family. To trust the institutions that oversee the justice of our country, Canadians need to know that the political interference is something that those institutions are simply not exposed to. And we all know right now, we know this because of the people we hear from our ridings, because of the people who are responding to different articles across this country, that right now, right here in this country, there is significant doubt. In January of 2017, Vice Admiral Norman was suspended from his role as the military's second-in-command. Last March, he was charged with one count of breach of trust. It has been alleged that he was leaking government secrets on a shipbuilding deal. This is a serious charge. In the 41st Parliament, New Democrats supported the national shipbuilding strategy. In fact, all parties did. I recently spent the day in Port McNeill, a beautiful community in my riding, with the Canadian Navy. Commodore Topshee brought several ships to visit the community and do the important work of outreach. It is moments like this, Madam Speaker, that it is easy to be proud of the Canadian Armed Forces. The trip I had on an Orca patrol craft was amazing. This experience showed me, again, the high level of skill and dedication those men and women in uniform have. I was very impressed. Although on that trip, I did not speak to anyone about the shipbuilding strategy, I was reminded of a comment I heard from someone about the continuous reduction of support that we have seen in this country to the military over the last 20 years. As this constituent said to me, the military has become very efficient. At some point, it is impossible to become more so. At some point, you just need more resources to get the job done. I hope that in the context of this conversation, we are all mindful of this, especially as we face the realities of climate change. Our Canadian Armed Forces are some of the most concerned about these issues, and I've heard those worries expressed at the National Defence Committee. It is also the Canadian Armed Forces who are trained to protect us, and in the case of natural disasters, it is important, Madam Speaker, that they have the proper resources to do the jobs they are asked to do. Returning to the Vice Admiral, who has denied all wrongdoing, and his trial is scheduled to begin in August. When we look at this case before us, these are serious conversations that we need to be having, and Canadians are having them across this country. Madam Speaker, the Liberals are currently facing now 2 allegations of influencing Crown attorneys, which are supposed to be independent of political interference. If these allegations are proven true, it calls in the question the impartiality of the Crown attorneys and will throw the Office of Public Prosecution Service of Canada into disrepute. Madam Speaker, this is certainly not something that I want to see happen. Yet when I look at the history of our Canadian Armed Forces, we have seen so many things go awry. Successive governments continuing to play politics with the lives of the men and women who serve our country. When it comes to the current government, they promised a new fighter jet, one with an open and fair competition, and they have failed to deliver. Instead, the competition is delayed until after the next election, and the plan is to buy used Australian jets that has been discussed. As the member representing Comox 19 Wing, this is something that I've had to share my alarm about and have done so in communicating that concern to the Minister of National Defence. Madam Speaker, I see the hardworking people in the 19 Wing in my riding. I appreciate their dedication to the community and the amazing work that they do. I think it is very important that at no point we put them at risk by not getting them the proper equipment that they so desperately need. And I just have to say again, it is unfortunate that they have had to wait so long. During the last election, the Liberals promised a return to peacekeeping for Canada, but they have so far considerably underdelivered on that promise. The RCN needs ships now to meet domestic security requirements and international obligations. Any delay or changes to the national shipbuilding strategy will result in lost jobs for Canadians and a further capability gap in the Navy. And that is something that we just cannot have. I remember the Canadian Navy coming to speak to the Defence Committee and talking about the challenges they were facing in providing safety and support to the Arctic region of this country. You know, unfortunately, some people think that the ice is gone and tourists are going up with boats that are simply not going to do the job, and they are put in very risky and unsafe situations. We need to make sure that the Royal Canadian Navy has the resources that it needs to address these issues. Sadly, this has been the reality of our armed forces for far too long, doing their very best with the limited resources they have. The last Conservative government led to 10 years of drastic cutbacks across all of the Canadian Armed Forces. And the fact is, that government failed to get the procurement underway for all branches of the Canadian Armed Forces, and the current capability gaps are a direct result of a decade of inaction that has been followed up by another over 3 years of inaction. This is disappointing in this country. Like so many Canadians, the Canadian Armed Forces are just being asked to wait. Just continue to wait a little bit longer, and that is simply not okay. I will continue to do my work to change this. Madam Speaker, I will be supporting this motion. In the face of the many allegations, there is a sense of disquiet in Canada. Releasing information for the lawyers of Vice Admiral Norman is appropriate. Having the Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council office keep out of any so-called trial strategy is again only appropriate. What Canadians want to see is transparency, and they want to see accountability. They want to believe that the institutions here in this place are sacred and held sacred and not full of political interference. Sometimes it is just time to accept what is before you, and I certainly hope that this government will do so. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for, I know it's, I just said it a while ago to you, Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And thank you to my honourable colleague for her impressive speech on this very important matter. And I had the privilege of working with her on the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and her commitment to our Canadian forces, as well as the rule of law, is something that we should all aspire to in this place. On the important conversation that we're having today about Admiral Norman's trial and whether or not he is in a position to get a fair trial based on the obstruction, obfuscation, and interference that this government is putting forward. I wonder if she could take it to perhaps a broader perspective and give us some thoughts on whether or not we as Canadians should be concerned about the strong message that this sends, a strong negative message that this type of behavior from the government sends to anyone who would stand up for the rule of law, for anyone who would put their neck out to do what's right for God, Queen, and country, because if they do, they will find themselves destroyed. Could she perhaps comment on that?
The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for her question. And I too appreciated our time together working for the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. I was very honored when she represented our country so well in multiple events, and I was actually very sad to see such a dedicated person no longer be able to keep her position and her role within the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. You know, I think today and across Canada, we're seeing a lot of people who are expressing a lot of frustration, a lot of cynicism. I talked earlier in my speech about the realities of so many people across our country that are dealing with things as basic as, you know, trying to find a place to live, trying to find appropriate childcare, and worried about if they're going to be able to keep their job if they cannot find that childcare. These things are really important to people, finding a home, having enough money to afford your medication. And when this kind of behavior is seen as what's important in this place, when we see brave women stand up on principle and say how they feel, and it's very apparent based on testimony that we've heard from the former Attorney General that there was multiple opportunities for a better conversation and a more honest conversation that simply did not happen. So Canadians are struggling. Like I said, they want to know that their institutions are fair. They want to know that political interference isn't part of those institutions. When they're just dealing every day with getting by, making ends meet, they want to know that if something occurs and they're dealing with those institutions, that they will not be in a place of discomfort because of that political interference. So I hope that this is part of our discussion today. I hope that there's a reflection of all of us in this House about what our work is to make sure that we're as honest and open as we possibly can be, and that when accusations come forward, we make sure to make those things public. That is exactly why we ask for a public inquiry.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I did want to pick up on my colleagues' thoughts in regards to the current status of the Canadian forces and the equipment and the capacity-related issues. Ultimately, it's been pointed out we have a very much an active court process that's taking place today. And I'm thinking upon reflection on the motion itself that we're debating, that given that it is an active court process, that maybe we could be spending more time talking about what it is that she's referenced, and that is ensuring that we have the capacity in the many different areas of our Canadian forces, because it goes even beyond ships to our Air Force, to having the proper military equipment for the Canadian forces. And this is something in which I think the Chamber could have more debate and dialogue on, because it is supporting our women and men of the forces. And just her thoughts on that particular issue.
The Honourable Member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, Madam Speaker, I thank the member for the question. I think it's also important to remind that side that they're actually in the role of government. And one of the things that has been really frustrating for many people in the Canadian Armed Forces is that aspect that I talked about of waiting. We know the process is long. When we look at the procurement process for our armed forces, that is a long process that takes up a lot of time. If there's a change in government, that suddenly gets changed for them, and the resources that they need have now stepped back up to several more years. And unfortunately, what we've seen in this government is a lot of talk and not a lot of action, and our armed forces are waiting for those. You know, I again will talk about the 19 Wing in Comox that I am so incredibly proud to represent. You know, the work that they do, especially in areas like search and rescue, it's incredibly important. It saves lives. The training that they do internationally, the work that they do, I know several of the members have been over to Mali that come from my riding doing hard, incredible work. They need the resources to do that safely. Waiting and waiting and waiting for the discussions to happen and the action to not follow through is very distressing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments?